The rain didn't just fall that night. It attacked. The drops were heavy, almost solid, as though the sky had gathered all its fury and was now emptying it over this forgotten corner of the world, without mercy, without pause. The occasional flash of lightning tore through the darkness, and for a fraction of a second revealed the wet outlines of houses. Then everything sank back into black. The wind came from the sea, raw and salt-laced, and lashed everything in its path. Rooftops, shorelines, the narrow streets that wound between old walls like furrows in tired skin. Old people would have said this was the weather of Judgment Day. And that evening, it would have been hard to argue. The settlement looked abandoned. Windows dark, doors locked, streets empty as the bottom of a forgotten glass. The houses pressed against one another, tightly, almost desperately, as if together they could bear what none of them could carry alone. Their facades were slick with rain, and the cracks in their walls told stories nobody wanted to hear anymore. Only at the end of the main street was the picture different. The largest house in the settlement burned from within, windows full of light, warm and yellow, as if whoever was inside refused to acknowledge the storm outside. Above the entrance, a sign reading "Open" flickered in the dark, persistently, almost stubbornly. From inside came the sounds of a living world. Laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, someone telling a story everyone already knew, but was glad to hear again. Then in the distance, a yellow dot appeared, at first barely visible, a ghost among the downpours. Then growing, drawing closer, cutting through the darkness. Soon it became clear it was not a light. It was a person. A girl, hunched over her handlebars, fighting the wind and rain with everything she had, as if this were personal. A duel she had no intention of losing. The bicycle raced along the wet road, tires slicing through puddles, water spraying in every direction. She was cursing. Quietly at first, then louder. Her fate, her job, every possible reason she was outside at this hour in this weather, instead of somewhere dry and warm. Her yellow rain jacket had long since surrendered. The fabric was soaked, heavy as sin, cold to the bone. It offered nothing anymore, only the illusion that something stood between her and the storm. When she sped under the canopy before the lit entrance without slowing, she swerved sharply at the last moment, just barely. A group of young men, cooling their overheated heads against the wall, barely scattered in time. Flushed faces, unsteady legs, loud laughter, too much alcohol, not enough sense. The consequences were immediate. A wave of water, thrown up by the wheel, from a deep puddle, hit the young men from the waist down with cold, democratic precision. 1 second of silence, then shouts, curses, and inarticulate rage, the kind that comes when a person feels humiliated but can't quite work out how it happened. The yellow figure stepped off the bicycle completely calmly, began locking the chain as if she had noticed nothing. That indifference enraged them more than the water. With clenched fists, they began moving toward her, steps unsteady, but intentions clear. The yellow figure slowly turned around. From beneath the large hood, blue eyes flashed. Unhurried, she reached up to the edge of the hood and removed it with a slow, deliberate movement. Wet hair fell across her face and clung to her skin, water dripping down her neck and along her collar. She looked at the 5 young men who had stopped mid-step, questioningly, as if she genuinely couldn't work out what the problem was. Silence. Before them stood not a reckless male cyclist. Before them stood a girl. And despite disheveled wet hair, soaked clothing, and raindrops sliding down her cheek, she stood proudly, upright, without a trace of fear, as if she were the one who held authority in this situation. Perhaps she was. "Hey, you!" one of them shouted, voice hoarse, soaked in alcohol and borrowed courage. "You got me wet. You're going to pay for that." The others erupted in laughter, rough, hollow, full of nothing. The girl watched them, quietly, drops still sliding down her face, but she cared about that as much as she cared about the rain itself. Then she spoke. "I see angry faces," she said in a voice that was unnervingly calm, almost friendly. "And now I finally understand why you're staring at me like that." She bowed her head, slow, controlled. "I apologize. I was racing through the rain and got a little carried away with my speed. I'm truly sorry." When she raised her head again, she was already upright. No fear, no hurry. She turned and headed toward the entrance. "Oh, my dear," she heard from behind her. "Just wait a moment." A hand grabbed her wrist, a rough grip, certain, possessive. The grip of someone not accustomed to being refused. An apology alone won't be enough. He began pulling her toward him. His other hand descended toward her body. But the wet jacket slid beneath his fingers, and he couldn't find what he was looking for. The girl didn't resist, didn't scream, didn't try to pull away. She simply stood there, head slightly bowed. But her blue eyes began to flash strangely. The brightness in them, that calm, almost pleasant light, disappeared. Something else took its place. Cold, precise, dangerously still, like the sea just before a storm when it goes smooth and dark and completely silent. That stillness unsettled the attacker more than anything else could have. Then it thundered. "Enough, let her go. Now!" Not a shout, not a plea. A command spoken in a voice that had no room for doubt. It cut through the jeering like a blade. The attacker's hand faltered and dropped. But the girl didn't step back. Her hands slowly clenched into fists. The weight of her body shifted almost imperceptibly forward. Anyone who knew how to read a body saw it clearly. She was preparing to attack. "Yeon!" The same voice again, now edged with impatience. "Come inside. You're late." Yeon extinguished that look, like a switch. She turned to the attacker and gave him a cold smile. Not the kind that offers friendship, the kind that makes a promise. "I hope we meet again," she said quietly. Then she stepped past him as if he weren't there and walked toward the large figure, filling the doorway like a wall. Her boss, the innkeeper. She nodded to him and disappeared inside. The innkeeper looked at the young men, that hidden smile he kept for special occasions. "Why are you glaring at me like that? You should be thanking me." "For what?" They gaped. "Our girl would have eaten you for dinner," he said calmly. "It was only just." He turned and went back inside. Yeon tidied herself up as best she could in the kitchen. A cloth, her face. Wet hair pulled back and pinned into a bun, carelessly, without a mirror, without particular concern for the result. Many strands remained around her face, disheveled and stuck to her skin. She looked as though the sea had spat her out onto the shore. But this caused her no trouble. Her features were unusual, the kind that are difficult to describe but impossible to overlook. Blue eyes, deepened slightly too dark for someone who had just been laughing, framed by long lashes, a delicate nose, red full lips, a complexion that existed somewhere between two worlds. Beneath loose jeans, long legs barely suggested themselves. Beneath a faded grey shirt, everything else. She appeared either unaware of her beauty or simply indifferent to it. Perhaps genuinely indifferent. She smiled briefly at Ha-un, who was already rushing between tables. Then she got to work. And there was work to be done. Trays, bottles, glasses, orders overlapping one another. She moved between tables with the precision of someone who knows every corner of a space, every table, every chair, every guest who will order again before they've reached the bottom of their glass. But the strangest thing was this. The rowdy guests calmed down the moment they saw her nearby. Voices lowered, tones softened. Men who moments before had been loud and overbearing, certain the world owed them something, now sat upright and nodded politely. Either they respected her, or they feared her. Yeon offered them a wide smile and sweet words that came so naturally, anyone who didn't know her would have taken them for genuine. Ha-gyun knew her, and Ha-gyun knew that smile wasn't her real one. When the inn closes, the last two guests left just before dawn. The door closed with a soft click that sounded disproportionately loud in the sudden silence. The noise disappeared with them, the laughter, the voices, the clinking of glasses, all at once, as if someone had switched off the sound. Yeon and Ha-hun collapsed onto chairs at the bar. Neither said anything. There was no need. The exhaustion was the kind that goes deeper than muscles, the kind that takes your words too. Ha-hun cradled a cup of lukewarm tea with both hands. Her fingers still trembled slightly, shoulders slumped, eyelids heavy. She stared at the table in front of her, as if searching for the answer to a question she hadn't said aloud. "Tonight was absolutely mad," she said finally. Voice worn out, nearly colorless. "I can barely stand, and I won't see my bed for at least another hour." She closed her eyes. "I don't know how I'll keep this up." Yeon looked at her sideways. Her eyes held no softness, at least not the warm, cushioned kind. Her concern always expressed itself differently, sharper, as if loving someone meant telling them the truth first, even when it hurt. "Are you worn out?" she said. "This miserable job isn't worth either of our time. I've told you 100 times. We have no future here. None of this is going anywhere. Not for you, not for me." She shifted on her chair. The space was beginning to suffocate her, or perhaps the thought of staying was. In a bigger city, things would be different for both of us. More opportunities, more air. But you? Her gaze settled on Ha-yun's face. "You're in love again." It wasn't a question. And because you're in love, you can't move. Ha-yun didn't answer immediately. Hyun's words had struck her, not because they were unfair, precisely because they were accurate to the point of pain. She loved her, Yeon, like a sister, or perhaps more. They shared everything: hunger, exhaustion, fear, those rare moments when something was good, and the far more frequent ones when nothing was. She couldn't imagine a single day without her. And that was precisely what made everything so complicated. The innkeeper's son. Her love for him hadn't been a decision. It had arrived quietly, unnoticed, the way water finds its way through a crack in stone. At first, only a glance that lasted a second too long. Then words exchanged in the kitchen after closing, when they were alone and everything around them was still. Then touches, accidental, but not really. Each of those moments had been an entire chapter to her. Just the memory of him now surged through her body like a wave. She quickly lowered her gaze. She didn't want Yeon to see her like this. Soft, in love. Vulnerable in the way that made Yeon impatient. But Yeon had already stood up. She grabbed a cloth and began wiping the tables, sharply, with movements too decisive for cleaning. The wooden surfaces creaked beneath her hands. Foolish girls, she muttered, more to herself than to Yeon. Always the same. They fall in love and then they stay, they wait, they hope. And meanwhile, life runs through their fingers like water. She stopped. The hand holding the cloth hung in the air for a moment. Love doesn't pay the bills, she said more quietly, without turning around. It doesn't stay beside you when the money runs out. It doesn't stand behind you when everyone turns their back. Yeon stood slowly. She stepped toward her carefully, as if afraid Yeon might push her away. She placed a hand on her wrist, gently but firmly. You always protect me, she said, even when I ask you not to. I know you only want what's best for me. Yeon didn't turn around. I just don't want you to stay trapped here, she said, in a place that can give you nothing you ever promised yourself. Do you understand? Nothing? Hakun bowed her head. Maybe you're wrong, she whispered. Maybe sometimes it's worth staying for someone. Silence. That dense, uncomfortable silence that settles between two people who know each other too well to pretend. Yeon began wiping the tables again. If you get burned, she said finally. Cold, final. I'll pick you up off the floor, like always. Yeon smiled faintly. I know. And that was precisely the problem. Not that Yeon was wrong, but that Ha-hun knew she was right and would follow her to the end of the world when the time came. She only hoped the time wouldn't come too soon.